What happens when a routine flight turns into a theater of prejudice? On a bright Tuesday morning, a decorated airline captain, a man trusted with hundreds of lives, stands in the aisle of his own aircraft and refuses to fly. His reason? A 17-year-old black girl, a brilliant student on her way to the academic competition of a lifetime. He cites a threat, a gut feeling he can't ignore. But as the standoff escalates and the entire plane becomes a pressure cooker of tension, airport security is called. And what they bring with them isn't just a solution, it's a shocking revelation about the pilot himself, tied to a pair of FBI credentials that will unravel everything. Stay with me as we unpack this incredible true-to-life drama of arrogance, prejudice, and the devastating karma that followed. The air in Terminal B of Chicago O'Hare International was a familiar symphony of chaos and anticipation. Rolling suitcases clicked across the polished linoleum like 1,000 frantic metronomes. The scent of Cinnabon and stale coffee hung heavy, a perfume unique to places of transit. For 17-year-old Zoe Washington, however, it was the smell of opportunity. She clutched her boarding pass for Global Skyways Flight 1128 to San Francisco, the paper already slightly crinkled from her nervous grip. Beside her, her mother, Dr. Aaliyah Washington, a cardiologist with a calm and measured demeanor that had soothed countless anxious patients, projected an aura of serene confidence. "Deep breath, sweetie," Aaliyah said, her voice a low, comforting hum. "You've done the hard part. The presentation is flawless. The research is groundbreaking. This is just the journey." Zoe nodded, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know, Mom. It's just the National STEM Exposition. It's the biggest thing that's ever happened to me. The scholarship could change everything." It was true. Zoe's project on bioremediation using genetically modified fungi to break down microplastics wasn't just a high school science fair entry. It was doctoral-level work. It had earned her a coveted spot as one of 20 national finalists. The grand prize was a full-ride scholarship to Stanford, her dream school. The laptop in her carry-on bag, nestled between a change of clothes and a well-loved copy of The Martian, contained the culmination of 2 years of her life. They were in boarding group 2. Zoe watched the first-class passengers and uniformed military personnel file down the jet bridge. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, feeling the familiar weight of her laptop. It felt like carrying her entire future on her shoulders. "Boarding Group 2, the gate agent, a harried-looking man named David Chen, announced into the microphone. Aaliyah gave Zoe's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Our turn. Let's go get that scholarship." They joined the line, shuffling forward with the quiet excitement of the other passengers. Zoe found their seats, 14A and 14B, a window and a middle. She slid into the window seat, pressing her forehead against the cool double-pane glass to watch the ground crew scurry around the massive Airbus A321. The sheer physics of getting this metal tube into the air never ceased to amaze her. The boarding process continued smoothly. A businessman in a wrinkled suit took the aisle seat, immediately pulling out his laptop. A young couple with a baby settled in across the aisle. The flight attendants, a warm, smiling woman named Clara Jenkins and a younger man, moved efficiently through the cabin, their voices a practiced litany of "Welcome aboard" and "Let me help you with that." Zoe felt the nervous energy in her stomach begin to subside, replaced by a thrum of excitement. In just a few hours, she'd be in California. The hotel was booked, her presentation suit was neatly packed, and she'd recited her opening statement in her head at least 100 times. The final passengers trickled in. The overhead bins were closed with satisfying clicks, and Clara's voice came over the intercom, beginning the safety demonstration. Aaliyah took Zoe's hand. "See? Everything is fine." The cabin door was sealed. The jet bridge pulled away, and the aircraft began its slow, powerful pushback from the gate. Zoe watched the terminal shrink, her heart lifting with it. Then, the plane stopped. It wasn't an abrupt stop, but a gentle cessation of movement. The whine of the engines changed pitch. A few passengers murmured, looking around. After a minute of silence, a different voice came over the intercom. It was deeper, laced with an unmistakable, almost dismissive authority. "Folks, this is your captain, Robert Miller. We have a slight delay before we head to the taxiway. Just need to resolve a minor issue here in the cabin. Appreciate your patience." Zoe exchanged a confused glance with her mother. A cabin issue usually meant a passenger dispute or a medical problem, but the cabin was quiet, peaceful. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Miller stepped out. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with a stern, granite-like face, silvering hair cut in a severe military style, and pale blue eyes that seemed to scan the cabin with a cold, analytical gaze. He didn't look at the passengers as people, but as data points. His eyes swept down the aisle, passing over rows of faces, before they landed with unnerving precision on seat 14A, on Zoe. He walked down the aisle, his polished black shoes making no sound on the carpet. He stopped right beside their row, his presence casting a shadow over them. He ignored Aaliyah completely. His piercing gaze was fixed solely on Zoe. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and devoid of any warmth. "I'm going to need you and your associate to come with me. We need you to deplane." The captain's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a moment Zoe thought she had misheard. Deplane. Why? She looked at her mother, whose calm expression had been replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. Aaliyah was the first to speak, her voice steady despite the shock. "I'm sorry, Captain. There must be some mistake. We're in our assigned seats." Captain Miller did not look at Aaliyah. His eyes remained locked on Zoe, who felt herself shrinking under his gaze. It wasn't just a look of authority. It was a look of suspicion, of condemnation. She felt a hot flush of shame and confusion creep up her neck. "There's no mistake," Miller said flatly. "I'm exercising my right as captain of this aircraft to refuse service. There's a security concern. Now please, let's not make a scene. Gather your belongings and come with me." The phrase security concern ricocheted around the nearby rows. The businessman on the aisle, who had been typing furiously, now looked up, his eyes wide with alarm. The young mother across the aisle instinctively pulled her baby closer. A murmur rippled through the front half of the cabin. Zoe's mind raced. Security concern. Her. She thought of the contents of her bag. A laptop, a textbook, a novel, some snacks. What could possibly be a threat? The only thing dangerous was the potential of her research to disrupt the plastics industry. Aaliyah's spine straightened. The cardiologist, the calm professional, was gone. In her place was a mother, fierce and protective. "Captain Miller," she said, her voice now edged with steel. "You are going to have to be significantly more specific. You have singled out my 17-year-old daughter without a shred of explanation. What is this security concern?" Miller finally deigned to look at Aaliyah, his lip curling in a faint sneer. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics. I have an unease about this passenger. My gut has kept me and my crew safe for 30 years, from my time in the Air Force to my tenure here. It's telling me something is wrong. That's all the reason I need. It's my ship, my call." His use of "this passenger" while looking at Zoe made the accusation clear and deeply personal. Zoe felt the stares of dozens of strangers on her. They weren't just looking, they were judging. In their eyes, she was no longer a promising young scientist. She was a security concern. The humiliation was a physical blow. Clara, the senior flight attendant, hurried over, her professional smile looking strained. "Captain, perhaps we could discuss this in the galley," she suggested, trying to de-escalate. "There's nothing to discuss, Clara," Miller snapped, not taking his eyes off Aaliyah. "They're getting off the plane, now." Aaliyah stood up, moving partially into the aisle to position herself between the captain and her daughter. She was shorter than Miller, but she stood with an unyielding dignity that seemed to make her his equal in stature. "No," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with finality. "We will not be deplaning. You are making a baseless accusation against a minor. You are discriminating against my daughter. I want to know on what grounds you are making this decision." Miller's cold composure finally cracked. A flash of raw anger lit his eyes. On the grounds that I don't feel safe with her on my aircraft," he boomed, his voice now loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "She's been nervous and fidgety since she got on board. She's clutching that backpack like it's a bomb, and I will not be responsible for flying a potential threat across the country." The cabin erupted in gasps. The accusation, now naked and ugly, was laid bare for everyone to see. Zoe stared at him, her heart pounding in her ears. Nervous and fidgety, she was on her way to the most important event of her life. Clutching her backpack, it held her future. He had twisted her innocent excitement and anxiety into something sinister, and he had done it, she knew with a sickening certainty, for one reason and one reason only. In a plane full of people, he had looked at her, a young black girl, and seen a threat. "That is outrageous." Aaliyah's voice trembled with fury. "My daughter is a finalist in the National STEM Exposition. Her laptop with her presentation is in that bag. She is nervous because her entire academic future is on the line." A passenger a few rows up, a woman in a sharp business suit, spoke up. "This is illegal. Federal regulations require a credible, specific, and current threat to remove a passenger." "A gut feeling doesn't qualify." Another passenger, a young man with a phone held up discreetly, said, "Yeah, and it looks a whole lot like racial profiling, man." Captain Miller's face hardened into a mask of righteous fury. He seemed to draw strength from the opposition, his conviction deepening. "I don't need a lecture on FAA regulations from a passenger." He spat at the woman. Then he pointed a trembling finger at Zoe. "I know her type. I've seen it before. I will not risk the lives of 200 people on a maybe. This plane does not move until she is off it." He turned and strode back toward the cockpit, his back ramrod straight. "Clara, call the gate. Have airport security meet me at the jet bridge. We're removing them. Forcibly, if necessary." The finality of his words was a slam of a prison door. Zoe felt tears welling in her eyes, hot and bitter. Her dream, her scholarship, her future. It was all being torn away by the baseless prejudice of one man in a position of absolute power. She wasn't just being asked to leave a plane. She was being told that she didn't belong, that she was inherently dangerous, that her very presence was a threat. The humiliation was absolute. The atmosphere inside the aircraft cabin transformed. What had been a space of mundane transit was now a sealed courtroom, and Zoe was the one on trial. The engines were silent, but the air hummed with a palpable tension. Every passenger was now an unwilling juror, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, curiosity, and discomfort. Clara Jenkins, the flight attendant, looked pale. She approached Zoe and Aaliyah, her expression a mess of professional duty and personal apology. "Dr. Washington, Miss Washington, I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice strained. "I've never seen anything like this. His behavior is unacceptable." "It's not your fault," Aaliyah replied, her voice tight with controlled rage. She placed a hand on Zoe's arm, a silent anchor in the storm of hostile stares and whispered condemnations. "But we are not moving. We have done nothing wrong." Up at the front of the plane, David Chen, the gate agent, appeared at the open cabin door, his face a mask of anxiety. He spoke in hushed, urgent tones with Captain Miller, who stood with his arms crossed, an immovable object of pure obstinance. The businessman in the aisle seat, a man named Mr. Peterson, finally spoke. "This is insane," he muttered, shaking his head. "I've got a multi-million-dollar merger meeting in Palo Alto. We need to take off." He looked at Aaliyah not with malice, but with the frustration of a man whose schedule was being disrupted. "Maybe you should just, to get things moving." Aaliyah turned her head slowly to face him. "You're suggesting we should surrender to a man's blatant racism just for your convenience?" Mr. Peterson flushed. "No, of course not. I just meant—" He trailed off, realizing there was no way to finish that sentence without sounding monstrous. The woman in the business suit, who introduced herself as Susan Alvarez, a corporate lawyer from New York, leaned forward. "Don't you dare go anywhere," she said to Aaliyah, her voice firm. "He has no legal footing. Let him call security. Let him call the FAA. Let's see how his gut feeling holds up under actual scrutiny. Meanwhile, a young man in row 16, Kevin Lee, a travel vlogger with a modest online following, was no longer being discreet. His phone was held up openly, its small red light indicating it was recording. The lens was pointed directly at the unfolding drama. He was capturing the hushed, angry conversations, the flight attendants' worried faces, and the rigid, unyielding posture of Captain Miller at the front of the plane. The standoff stretched into an eternity. 10 minutes. 20. The air in the cabin grew stale. The baby across the aisle began to fuss, its cries adding a new layer of stress to the environment. Finally, 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared at the jet bridge, followed by a man in a crisp airport operations supervisor's uniform. He was Frank Dawson, a veteran of O'Hare's complex ecosystem. He was a man with a reputation for being unflappable, a calm center in the daily hurricanes of airport life. Dawson boarded the aircraft, his expression neutral. He conferred with Miller first, who spoke with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed the authorities were there to be his personal enforcers. Miller gestured back toward Zoe, his voice a low, accusatory rumble. Zoe watched them, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. This was it. These men were going to believe the pilot. They were going to march down the aisle and physically remove her, her mother, and her dreams from the plane, branding her a threat in front of everyone. The shame was so intense she felt she might be sick. Supervisor Dawson listened patiently, his eyes scanning the cabin. He saw the phone recording the incident. He saw the lawyerly set of Susan Alvarez's jaw. He saw the protective fury in Aaliyah's eyes. And he saw the terrified, humiliated 17-year-old girl at the center of it all. After a few minutes, he nodded slowly at Miller and walked down the aisle. He didn't stop at Zoe's row. Instead, he moved past them, speaking in a calm, authoritative voice that carried through the tense cabin. Folks, my name is Frank Dawson. I'm the operations supervisor. We're aware of the situation and the delay. We are going to resolve this as quickly as possible. We appreciate your patience. He then made his way back to row 14 and knelt in the aisle, so he was at eye level with Zoe and Aaliyah. It was a simple, disarming gesture that immediately changed the power dynamic. Dr. Washington, Miss Washington, he said, his voice soft. I need to understand what happened from your perspective. Aaliyah, her voice shaking slightly but clear as a bell, recounted the entire episode. She explained who Zoe was, the importance of her trip, and the captain's immediate, inexplicable hostility and baseless accusations. Dawson listened without interruption. When she was finished, he looked at Zoe. Miss Washington, has anyone, at any point, asked to see what's in your backpack? Zoe shook her head, unable to speak. So the captain made this accusation without even attempting to verify it? That's correct, Aaliyah confirmed. Dawson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He stood up and walked back to the front, where Captain Miller was waiting impatiently. Captain, Dawson said, his voice now stripped of its earlier softness. The passengers are not the issue here. They are not deplaning. Miller's face contorted in disbelief. What did you say? Are you overriding my authority? I am the pilot in command of this vessel. And I am the supervisor in charge of this gate and the safety of everyone in this terminal. Dawson countered, his voice firm. You have provided no actionable intelligence, no specific threat. You've only provided a personal bias. That's not enough to remove a passenger, and you know it. Miller seemed to swell with rage. My bias? My bias is 30 years of experience telling me when something is wrong. I'm not flying with her on board. Either they go or this flight is canceled. He was playing his final trump card. Dawson stared at him, his expression unreadable. Fine. Let's talk about your experience, Captain. Let's talk about your judgment. He lowered his voice, so only Miller, Clara, and the gate agent could hear. Before we cancel this flight and inconvenience 200 people, there's something you and I need to discuss, in private. Let's step onto the jet bridge. Miller scoffed, a look of triumph on his face. He thought Dawson was finally folding, that he was going to be reprimanded in private before they removed Zoe. "About time," he sneered. He followed Dawson onto the jet bridge, out of sight of the passengers. The cabin door remained open, a silent portal through which their fate would be decided. Zoe held her breath, every muscle in her body tensed for the final, crushing blow. The jet bridge was a sterile, echoing tunnel, a liminal space between the terminal and the aircraft. For Captain Robert Miller, it was the private stage where he expected to receive his apology. He had created a situation where the airline's only options were to back him or cancel a lucrative flight. The choice seemed obvious. "Look, Dawson," Miller began, his tone condescending. "I know you have procedures, but you need to understand who you're talking to. I'm not some rookie pilot who gets spooked by turbulence. My threat assessment is highly developed. I spent years in federal service. My instincts are sharp." To emphasize his point, he reached into the inner pocket of his uniform blazer. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and flipped it open, flashing it briefly but deliberately at Dawson. Inside, behind a plastic window, was an identification card. It bore the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and his photograph, younger but unmistakably him. "You see?" Miller said, a smirk playing on his lips. "I know what I'm talking about. My judgment is sound. Now, are you going to get that girl off my plane, or do I need to make a call to some old friends at the Joint Terrorism Task Force and tell them O'Hare has a problem with operational security?" He thought this was his checkmate. He had invoked the highest authority, implying a level of experience and access that a mere airport supervisor could not challenge. He expected Dawson to stammer, to apologize, to immediately comply. Frank Dawson did none of those things. He didn't even seem surprised. He simply looked at the credentials, then back at Miller's arrogant face. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. "Is that so, Captain Miller?" Dawson said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. He took a step closer, and for the first time Miller felt a prickle of unease. There was no deference in Dawson's eyes, only a cold, hard light. "Let me see that again," Dawson said. It wasn't a request. Slightly thrown, Miller hesitated before holding out the wallet again. Dawson took it from his hand. He didn't just glance at the ID, he scrutinized it. He turned it over, examined the edges, and held it up to the light from the terminal windows. "FBI, huh?" Dawson said conversationally. "Impressive. You must have been a special agent." "For 12 years, Miller said, puffing out his chest. "Counter-terrorism division. I've seen things you wouldn't believe. That's why I know a threat when I see one." Dawson nodded slowly, his eyes still on the ID. 12 years. Which means you would have left the Bureau. When? Around 2011? Miller's smirk faltered. "That's about right." "Why?" "Because, Captain," Dawson said, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. "This credential expired in 2012. It's a souvenir. It's worthless." The blood drained from Miller's face. "It's to show my background, my training." "Is it?" Dawson interrupted, taking another step forward, forcing Miller back against the wall of the jet bridge. "Or is it to intimidate people, to give your gut feelings a weight they don't deserve? Because what it's not is a license to racially profile a teenage girl and abuse your authority as a pilot." Dawson held up his own airport ID. "You see this? This gives me access to the airport's security systems, including a direct line to every federal agency that operates here. After your little threat, I had my team run your name. It took them all of 90 seconds. He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "Special Agent Robert Miller, dismissed from the FBI in October of 2011, not retired, dismissed, pending an internal affairs investigation into," and I quote, "a pattern of prejudicial behavior, unsubstantiated reporting, and misuse of agency resources." Each word was a hammer blow, shattering Miller's carefully constructed facade of authority and experience. The story he had told himself and others for over a decade, that he had honorably left the Bureau to seek a quieter life, was a lie. He had been fired, disgraced. They ran a full background check on you at Global Skyways when they hired you, I'm sure. Dawson continued relentlessly. But maybe you omitted a few key details about your federal service. Maybe you framed it as a voluntary retirement. Miller was speechless. He was completely and utterly exposed. The foundation of his arrogance, the experience he wielded like a weapon, was nothing but a sham built on a disgraceful past. Dawson stepped back, his face a mask of cold fury. You didn't have a gut feeling, Miller. You had a prejudice, the same prejudice that got you kicked out of the FBI. You saw a black girl and you manufactured a threat to fit your worldview. You used the authority this uniform gives you to bully a child and her mother. You delayed a flight with 200 passengers. You called me out here and you wasted the time of my officers. He held up Miller's wallet, dangling it from 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. And then you tried to use this lie to back me down. He tossed the wallet onto Miller's chest. You're not fit to fly this plane. You're not fit to wear that uniform. You are a liability, and your tenure as pilot in command of Flight 1128 is over. Effective immediately. Dawson turned and strode back into the aircraft, leaving Miller alone and trembling in the jet bridge, the ghost of his authority evaporating around him. The passengers, who had only seen the 2 men disappear for a tense conversation, were about to witness the spectacular fallout. Dawson stood at the front of the cabin, his voice ringing with newfound and absolute command. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "there has been a change in the flight crew. Captain Miller will not be flying this aircraft today." A collective gasp went through the plane. All eyes turned to the open door, waiting for Miller to appear and contest it. But he didn't. He remained out of sight, a defeated man stripped bare of his power and his lies. The unraveling was complete, but the consequences were just beginning. The cabin buzzed with stunned silence, followed by a wave of excited, confused whispers. Supervisor Dawson's announcement was a bombshell. Pilots weren't just changed like a flat tire, especially not after a confrontation like this. Aaliyah and Zoe exchanged a look of profound, dawning relief. Susan Alvarez, the lawyer, gave them a triumphant nod. Kevin Lee's phone was still recording, capturing every second of the incredible turn of events. Clara Jenkins, the flight attendant, looked both horrified and vindicated. She immediately got on the internal phone system, her voice low and urgent as she relayed the situation to the airline's operations center. From the jet bridge, a defeated Robert Miller finally emerged. His face was a ghastly shade of pale, his usual arrogant swagger completely gone. He looked shrunken, avoiding the glares and stares of the passengers as he gathered his flight bag from the forward galley. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. As he turned to leave, his gaze briefly met Zoe's. For a fleeting second, she saw not hatred, but a pathetic, desperate fear. Then he was gone, disappearing down the jet bridge under the watchful eye of a security officer. Dawson addressed the cabin again. Global Skyways is dispatching a replacement captain from a standby crew. We're told it should be about 30 minutes. We are deeply sorry for the delay and the unacceptable situation you were all subjected to. He gave a pointed, apologetic look towards row 14, before deplaning to manage the logistics. A wave of relief washed over the aircraft. People began talking openly now, dissecting what they had just witnessed. Mr. Peterson, the businessman, looked over at Aaliyah. I want to apologize for what I said," he stammered, his face red with embarrassment. "You were right. I was out of line." "Thank you," Aaliyah said simply, accepting the apology with grace. Just as it seemed the drama was over, and the long wait for a new pilot was beginning. A man in seat 12C stood up. He was unassuming, dressed in jeans and a simple gray polo shirt, and had been quietly reading a paperback novel throughout the entire ordeal. No one had paid him any mind. He walked calmly to the front of the aircraft where Clara was still on the phone. He waited patiently for her to finish. When she hung up, he spoke in a calm, quiet voice that nonetheless cut through the ambient chatter. "Ma'am," he said, holding up an ID badge that looked strikingly similar to the one Miller had flashed, only this one looked new, official. and very real. Special Agent Marcus Thorne, FBI. I'm afraid this situation isn't quite over. If a pin had dropped, it would have sounded like a thunderclap. Another FBI agent? Clara's eyes went wide. Agent Thorne's gaze swept the cabin, calm and assessing. I am on this flight for an unrelated federal matter, he explained, his voice now projecting enough for nearby passengers to hear. However, what I have just witnessed is a potential federal crime. The former captain of this aircraft, Robert Miller, did more than just harass and profile his passengers. He turned and looked directly at Susan Alvarez, the lawyer, as if recognizing a kindred spirit in procedure. Ma'am, you're a lawyer, correct? So you'll appreciate this. Under 18 U.S. Code Section 912, it is a felony to falsely assume or pretend to be an officer or employee acting under the authority of the United States. A new, more shocking realization dawned on those who heard him. Miller hadn't just been an arrogant pilot. He had potentially committed a serious crime in the process. Agent Thorne continued, his voice a lesson in calm authority. I overheard his conversation with Supervisor Dawson on the jet bridge. I heard him identify himself as a federal agent and present expired credentials in an attempt to intimidate an official and fraudulently enforce his will. That moves this from an internal airline matter to a federal one. He turned to Clara. The airline will handle his employment. I'll handle his criminal charges. I need you to secure the flight manifest. I'll also need to get contact information from several passengers who witnessed the event, particularly the young lady and her mother, the lawyer in row 11, and the gentleman in row 16 who I believe has a video recording of the entire incident. Kevin Lee lowered his phone, his mouth agape. He had just gone from vlogger to a material witness in a federal case. Agent Thorne walked down the aisle and stopped at Zoe's row. He had a kind, tired face, and his eyes held a deep well of empathy. Miss Washington, Dr. Washington, he said softly. My name is Marcus Thorne. On behalf of the decent people everywhere, I am profoundly sorry for what you were put through today. That man's actions were a disgrace to the uniform he was wearing and to the one he used to wear. What you did, standing your ground, took incredible courage. Zoe, who had been holding back her tears for what felt like a lifetime, finally felt one escape and trace a hot path down her cheek. They weren't tears of sadness anymore, but of overwhelming cathartic relief. Justice hadn't just been done. It was being meticulously, officially, and federally documented. Agent Thorne handed Aaliyah his card. We will be in touch. My colleagues will meet Mr. Miller at the end of that jet bridge. For now, I'd advise you to try and relax. Your flight to San Francisco will be leaving shortly. He nodded respectfully and returned to his seat as if he had done nothing more than ask for a glass of water. The cabin was left in a state of sheer awe. The villain of the story had not only been vanquished, but had, through his own hubris, walked directly into a legal steel trap. The second and far more significant twist of the day had been revealed. The pilot's desperate lie, his last-ditch effort to assert his authority, had been the very thing that would guarantee his complete and utter ruin. For Robert Miller, the jet bridge was more than a corridor. It was a gallows walk. The metallic tang of the air-conditioned air tasted of ashes. He expected to face the righteous fury of an airline operations manager. He was prepared for a shouting match, for a suspension, for a battle with his union. He was not prepared for the two impassive men in dark suits who stepped in front of him, their presence instantly sucking all the authority out of the space. One of them was the man from 12C, Special Agent Marcus Thorne. Robert Miller? The second agent, a tall man with a face that betrayed no emotion, said. His voice was flat, devoid of interrogation or accusation. It was the voice of a man stating a fact that could not be appealed. You need to come with us. We have some questions regarding a potential violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 912. The specific legal code hit Miller like a physical blow, impersonating a federal officer. It was a charge so far beyond what he had imagined that his mind went blank. His blustering defense, his appeals to his 30 years of service, his righteous indignation, all of it shriveled into a pathetic knot of fear in his stomach. The flimsy shield of his captain's uniform was gone, and he was just a man, stripped bare and trembling, being led away by the very authority he had so arrogantly tried to co-opt. He was guided into a small, windowless room deep within the terminal's secure area. The walls were a sterile beige, the only furniture a metal table and 3 hard chairs. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of the airport he had just left. It was the beginning of a free fall, a karma so swift and so comprehensive that it would dismantle his entire existence, piece by painstaking piece. The professional annihilation. While Miller sat sweating under the hum of a fluorescent light, the digital world was igniting. Kevin Lee, the vlogger from row 16, didn't wait. Connected to the airport's Wi-Fi, he quickly edited and uploaded his footage. He titled it with a clickbaity but brutally accurate headline: "Racist pilot tries to kick black teen off flight, gets fired and arrested on the spot." The video was a masterclass in viral outrage. It began with the shaky, tense footage of Miller towering over Zoe and Aaliyah. Text overlays appeared on screen. "Captain demands they deplane for security concerns." It showed Aaliyah's calm but firm defense, annotated with, "Hero mom stands her ground." Then came Miller's booming, accusatory shout, his face contorted in anger. "I don't feel safe with her on my aircraft." Kevin had zoomed in on Zoe's face at that moment, capturing the silent, devastating impact of the words. The climax was the arrival of Supervisor Dawson, the tense wait, and then the stunning appearance of Agent Thorne holding up his badge. The video ended with a freeze frame of Thorne's FBI credentials. Within an hour, it had 100,000 views. By the time Flight 1128 landed in San Francisco, it had passed 10 million. #Pilot Miller and #Fly with Zoe were trending worldwide. The corporate headquarters of Global Skyways went into a 5-alarm fire drill. Their social media accounts were a raging inferno of public condemnation. Celebrities were retweeting the video, politicians were issuing statements, and rival airlines were subtly capitalizing on the PR nightmare. Miller's phone, held in an evidence bag on the table in front of him, began to vibrate incessantly. It was the airline. When the agents finally allowed him to speak to his chief pilot, the conversation was brutally short. "Bob," said the voice on the other end, cold and distant, "you're on indefinite, unpaid suspension. Effective immediately. Don't come near company property. We'll be in touch." Miller knew what indefinite suspension meant. It was the prelude to the guillotine. He was radioactive, a public relations Chernobyl. The official termination notice arrived via courier at his house 2 days later. It was a thick packet of legal documents, citing clauses in his contract related to gross misconduct, endangerment of company reputation, and violation of the company's anti-discrimination and ethics policies. He was not just fired. His contract was declared null and void, meaning he would receive no severance, no benefits, and his pension was in jeopardy. A week later, the final professional nail was hammered into his coffin. A certified letter arrived from the Federal Aviation Administration, citing the ongoing federal investigation and the preliminary findings of the airline. They were issuing an emergency revocation of his airman's certificate, his pilot's license. The very document that defined his identity, that gave him access to the sky, was now a worthless piece of plastic. He was no longer a captain. He was grounded permanently. The legal labyrinth. The questioning in the beige room was a methodical dissection of his lies. Agent Thorne was no longer the quiet passenger from 12C. He was a professional, his questions precise and relentless. "Mr. Miller, when Supervisor Dawson challenged your authority, you displayed a wallet." Thorne began, his tone dispassionate. "Inside that wallet was an FBI identification card. Is that correct?" "I was just trying to show him my background, my experience," Miller stammered. "That wasn't the question," Thorne's partner interjected. "Did you display the credential?" "Yes." "And did you do so in an attempt to influence his decision, to lend credibility to your gut feeling?" I thought it was relevant." "Relevant how?" Thorne pressed. Were you acting under the authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation when you demanded a 17-year-old girl be removed from a commercial flight? No, of course not. I'm a pilot. Then why show the badge? Miller had no answer. He had done it out of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He had believed the symbol of his past power would grant him power in the present. He now saw, with horrifying clarity, that it had only given them a weapon to use against him. His court-appointed lawyer, a harried public defender, laid out the grim reality. They have you, Mr. Miller. They have you on video creating the disturbance. They have multiple sworn statements from credible witnesses, a lawyer, an airport supervisor, and an active FBI agent. They have you dead to rights on attempting to use an expired federal ID to intimidate an official during the commission of your duties. This isn't a trial we can win. The prosecutor initially offered a harsh deal, but as the public furor grew, the U.S. Attorney's Office decided a protracted, high-profile trial would be a circus. They wanted a conviction, and they wanted it quickly. They offered a final plea bargain: plead guilty to a misdemeanor charge of impersonating a federal officer in a non-threatening context, and they would recommend probation. If he refused, they would pursue the full felony charge, which carried a sentence of up to 3 years in federal prison. His lawyer advised him to take it. You go to trial, a jury of 12 people will see that video of you screaming at a teenage girl before the lawyers even give their opening statements. You'll be convicted before you even sit down. He took the deal. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly seen the video, was merciless in her sentencing lecture. "Mr. Miller, you abused 3 uniforms in one day," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The uniform of an airline captain, the uniform of the United States Air Force which you so often cited, and the ghost of the FBI uniform you were dismissed from. You are a disgrace to all of them." The sentence was 2 years of probation, a $25,000 fine, and 2,000 hours of community service. The service assigned to him was janitorial duty at a downtown community outreach center. 6 months prior, he had been earning over $300,000 a year to command a multi-million-dollar aircraft. Now he was scrubbing toilets for free, his evenings filled with the stench of bleach and despair, the social exile. The viral video ensured that Miller's face was instantly recognizable and universally reviled. His downfall became a national spectacle. News outlets dug deep. A reporter from the Washington Post found his file from the FBI. The vague, prejudicial behavior mentioned by Dawson was laid bare. It turned out Miller had a history of targeting minority communities in his counterterrorism work, wasting months of bureau time and resources chasing his gut feelings about innocent people, culminating in a wrongful raid that had led to his quiet dismissal. His entire career, which he had presented as heroic, was reframed as a pathetic series of prejudiced failures. His social life evaporated. His golfing buddies from the country club stopped returning his calls. The neighborhood 4th of July barbecue, which he and his wife usually attended, sent a clear message when their invitation never arrived. A trip to the grocery store became an ordeal. People would whisper and point. Teenagers would hold up their phones, smirking, trying to get a photo of the racist pilot. One day, a young woman seeing him in the cereal aisle simply looked at him and said, "My daughter is a brilliant black girl too. Shame on you." She then turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, his face burning with a humiliation so profound it was physically painful. The final and most devastating blow came from within his own home. His wife, Sarah, had endured his growing bitterness for years. She had seen him curdle after his dismissal from the FBI, transforming from a confident agent into an angry man who saw conspiracies and threats everywhere. She had begged him to seek therapy, but his pride wouldn't allow it. The incident on Flight 1128 was not a surprise to her. It was the inevitable public explosion of a poison he had been nurturing for over a decade. She watched the video once, her face ashen. That night she packed a suitcase. "I can't do this anymore, Bob," she said, her voice weary, all the fight gone out of her. "I looked at that poor girl's face on the screen, and I saw every person you've ever sneered at, every minority you've ever dismissed with one of your gut feelings. I saw your father in you, with all his hate." "Sarah, please," he begged, It was a mistake. I was under pressure. No, she said, cutting him off. It wasn't a mistake. It was you. It was the real you, the one I've been trying to pretend doesn't exist. You didn't just ruin your own life today. You took our name, our life together, and you smeared it in filth for the entire world to see. I won't be Mrs. Robert Miller, the racist pilot's wife. I'm done. She left that night. The divorce was quick and brutal. With no income and massive legal fees, he couldn't fight it. She got the house, a significant portion of their savings, and her freedom. Robert Miller was left with nothing. He moved into a small, bleak apartment across town, the kind with thin walls and the perpetual smell of boiled cabbage. The fine and his legal bills had wiped out his remaining funds. He sold his car. He spent his days sitting in the silence, a silence no longer broken by the comforting checklists of pre-flight routines or the hum of an engine, but haunted by the echo of a judge's condemnation and the memory of his wife walking out the door. He had stood in the aisle of his aircraft, a king in his own kingdom, and tried to cast out a young girl he deemed unworthy. Now, he was the one who had been cast out. From the sky, from his profession, from his home, from society. The cascade was complete. He had hit the ground and the wreckage was absolute. While Robert Miller's life was in a nosedive, Zoe Washington's was soaring. They arrived in San Francisco late, exhausted and emotionally drained, but also bound by a new, unspoken strength. The ordeal had been horrific, but the way it had been resolved, with such swift and decisive justice, had left them not with scars of victimhood, but with the armor of resilience. The story of Flight 1128 had, of course, reached the National STEM Exposition before they did. When Zoe and Aaliyah walked into the Convention Center Hotel the next morning, the organizers met them at the door. They weren't met with pity, but with profound respect. "Zoe Washington," said the lead judge, a distinguished professor from Caltech, "we heard about what happened. To endure that and still be here, you have the heart of a true scientist, the resilience to see things through no matter the obstacle." The news had subtly shifted the perception of Zoe. She was no longer just finalist #17. She was the young woman who had faced down bigotry with grace, the student whose brilliance had been so intimidating that a man had tried to stop her from even reaching the stage. There was a buzz around her, a sense of anticipation. When it was her turn to present, Zoe walked to the podium feeling a new kind of confidence. The nervousness was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer the anxiety of a girl hoping to win. It was the focused energy of a young woman who had earned her place and would not let anyone take it from her. She had faced down a far more personal and ugly challenge than complex scientific data. She began her presentation. Her voice, which had been silenced on the plane, was now clear and commanding. She spoke of microbial digestion and polymer chains, of the ecological crisis of microplastics, and of the elegant fungal-based solution she had spent 2 years developing. She didn't just recite facts. She told a story of a problem and a potential solution, her passion for the subject lighting up the room. The judges listened, captivated. The other finalists watched, inspired. Her mother, Aaliyah, sat in the front row, tears of pride streaming down her face. She was watching her daughter not just present a project, but claim her own power. When the award ceremony took place that evening, there was little doubt. The grand prize winner of this year's National STEM Exposition, receiving a full academic scholarship to Stanford University. The announcer's voice boomed, "is Zoe Washington." The hall erupted in a standing ovation. As Zoe walked to the stage, the spotlight followed her, the same kind of harsh, focused light that had singled her out on the airplane. But this time, it wasn't a light of suspicion. It was a light of admiration. Later that night, celebrating with her mother, Zoe looked out the hotel room window at the twinkling lights of San Francisco. "You know, Mom," she said thoughtfully, "in a weird way, what Captain Miller did. It helped me. It made me realize that my project, my dreams, they're not just for me. When he looked at me and saw a threat, He was afraid of my potential. Winning today wasn't just for the scholarship. It felt like proving him, and everyone like him, wrong. Aaliyah wrapped her arm around her daughter. He tried to ground you, sweetie, but he forgot one important thing about brilliant young women like you. What's that? Zoe asked. You were born to fly. The hard karma that had hit Robert Miller wasn't just about his punishment. It was about Zoe's triumph. His attempt to be the gatekeeper of her life, to decide who gets a seat on the plane and who doesn't, had failed spectacularly. In trying to block her path, he had inadvertently paved it with a renewed sense of purpose and a global audience cheering her on. He had tried to close a door, and in doing so, had opened up the entire world for her. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of injustice and ultimate triumph. The story of Zoe Washington and Robert Miller is a powerful reminder that prejudice, however powerful it may seem in the moment, is a brittle and hollow thing. It's a testament to the courage of those who stand up to it, like Dr. Aaliyah Washington, and the allies who lend their voices, like the passengers on Flight 1128. Most of all, it shows that the brightest lights can't be dimmed by the shadows of hatred. Zoe's ascent was fueled by the very attempt to keep her grounded. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to show your support for stories of justice. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope and resilience. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We believe in the power of storytelling to inspire change, and with your help, we can continue to bring more of these impactful real-life dramas to light. What did you find most powerful about Zoe's story? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching.